Hi, welcome to another midweek message. When God called Abram out of his homeland to sojourn in the land of Canaan, in Genesis chapter 12, God gave to Abram, later called Abraham, three great promises. First, that of his descendants, God was going to make a great nation. Second, that to that nation, the descendants of Abraham, God was going to give the land of Canaan, the land in which Abram sojourned. He would give them that land as their inheritance. And third, that in Abram's seed, all nations of the earth would be blessed. The unfolding of those promises and the fulfillment of those promises form the backbone of the Bible story from Genesis chapter 12 onward. The first of those promises, that Abram's descendants would become a great nation, was fulfilled as the descendants of Abraham were sojourners in the land of Egypt. Regarding Abram's grandson Jacob, we read in Deuteronomy chapter 26 and verse 5 that he went down to Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, that is, Jacob's sons and their families, 75 persons in total. But there, that is in Egypt, he became a great, mighty, and populous nation. In fact, the children of Abraham, the descendants of Abraham, became the nation that God promised them to be. And they formalized that status as a nation when they entered into a covenant with the Lord at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 19. God kept his promise. They became the nation that he said they would become. Secondly, to that nation, those descendants of Abraham, God gave them the land in which their forefathers had sojourned. Under the leadership of Joshua, the nation of Israel that left Egypt, that wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, under the leadership of Joshua, they crossed the Jordan River and conquered the land of Canaan as their inheritance. And near the end of the book of Joshua, in Joshua chapter 21, we're told, beginning in verse 43, "So the Lord gave Israel all the land which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, according to all that he had sworn to their fathers. And no one of their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hand." Verse 45, "Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass." God kept his promise. To the descendants of Abraham, the nation of Israel, he gave them the land of their forefathers sojourning. God kept his promise. And regarding that third great promise, that in the seed of Abraham all nations of the earth would be blessed, the promise was regarding seed, singular, one specific descendant of Abraham through whom all the people of the world might receive a blessing. Paul tells us in Galatians chapter 3 that the promise was made to Abraham and to his seed, not seeds as referring to many, but rather to one, and your seed, that is Christ. Galatians chapter 3 and verse 16. Jesus, as a descendant of the fleshly line of Abraham, read the genealogies of Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 3. Jesus, as a descendant of Abram, is the seed, the descendant, through whom all the nations of the earth would be blessed. God kept his promise. Despite the treachery of men, despite their faithlessness on different levels throughout the centuries, God was faithful. God kept every promise that he made to Abram back in Genesis chapter 12. The promises relayed to Isaac and Jacob, the 12 sons of Jacob. The promises that were unfolded throughout the generations and centuries between Abram and Jesus. This emphasizes to us one of the fundamental characteristics of God. As the scriptures say over and over again, God is faithful. He keeps his promises. And that is a great assurance when we read other promises that are contained for us in the pages of the scriptures. For example, in Matthew chapter 6, as part of Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said in Matthew 6 and verse 33, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." In context, Jesus is talking about the necessities of life, food and clothing and shelter. Jesus is saying that if we seek first to be right with God and seek first his rule, his domain, his kingship in our lives, that the necessities of life, our necessities, will be met. Now, we have to seek first being right on his terms, not ours or someone else's. We have to truly seek his kingship on his terms, not ours. Not merely calling him king, not merely calling him Lord, but actually serving him as such. But the promise is that if that's who and what we are, that our Lord will meet our necessities. We serve a faithful God who keeps his promises. That's a great promise to consider, especially in times like this with so much uncertainty and so much anxiety that fills our lives. There's another great promise that the Lord gives through the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13, Paul wrote, "No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it." God is faithful. God is not going to allow Satan to tempt us beyond what we have the capacity to resist. God's faithfulness will provide for us a way to escape that temptation so that we don't have to succumb to the wiles of the devil. He doesn't promise to remove us from the temptation. He doesn't promise to keep us from experiencing temptation, but that through God's faithfulness and his care, we will be able to endure or bear up under those circumstances. That's the promise of God, and God is faithful. Third, we're reminded through the Apostle Peter in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10. Despite some who doubted even then, Peter assures us in 2 Peter 3 verse 10, "The day of the Lord will come, like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up." The day of the Lord will come. Jesus describes it in Matthew chapter 25 as a day in which all men of all nations will be gathered before his throne for judgment. We're told in other passages that the dead will be raised. Those who are alive and remain will be caught up together. And together we will face the Lord to be judged for what we've done in this life, whether good or evil. But the day of the Lord will come. It's an appointment that we will not escape. God is faithful, and we can believe that promise because God has shown himself to be one who keeps his promises. We need to build our lives. We need to chart our course. We need to conduct ourselves accordingly, knowing that God is one who keeps his promises, that every word can be depended upon as absolutely true and something that he will bring to pass in his time. God is faithful. Are you faithful to him? Thanks for watching.